I feel like what's really helped me the most has been to acknowledge the grief. Like, don't just push it down and try to replace it with more work, or stuff to do. Like, actually get into the body, feel and process the grief, like really be willing to dance with it. There's always going to be a range of emotions, and if there's not, something might be off.
Welcome to the Crown Yourself podcast, where together we build your empire and transform your subconscious stories about what's possible for your business, body, and life. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, founder of crownyourself.com, and I'm a master mindset coach, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, known to my clients as a game changer. Each week, you get the conscious leadership strategies you need to help you reign with courage, clarity, and confidence so that you too can make the income and impact you deserve. Imagine this podcast as your royal invitation to step into your full potential and reign in your divine purpose. Your sovereignty starts here, and your reign is now. Oh my gosh, I am so excited to share with you the fact that my book, Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Become So Radically Interesting You'll Barely Keep From Interviewing Yourself, is now available on Amazon. So this episode is sponsored by my book. I am so excited to have birthed this book baby into the world. So click the link below and you will get your copy. I am so honored and excited to have been on this journey with you. This is the book that combines all the NLP communication strategies that we talk about on this podcast, along with podcast guesting strategies, tips, tricks, and how you share your story so that you serve, connect, and sell with your message. This book combines all of that to make you a radically interesting and masterful podcast guest that every podcast will want to have, including the top 1%. So let's get you booked on those top 1% of podcasts when you get your copy of Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Become So Radically Interesting You Will Barely Keep From Interviewing Yourself. Click the link below to buy it now. Jenna, welcome to the Crown Yourself podcast. I am so honored to have you here with us today to share with us about how soul can meet strategy.
I'm so pumped to be here.
So first and foremost, I want to know, you are this epic digital nomad and you travel with your business and, have Wi-Fi, will travel. What made you want to start paving that path?
I love, what a great question to start this whole episode with today, because it has been a journey. It has been a vibe. It's been basically 7 years, a full time, I would say, location independence, living this lifestyle, because there have been some longer stints in places, up to a year in one place, but there's also been a lot of 1 month places and travels and countries. And, for me, it really sparked, if I zoom back, it was 8 years ago this summer that I quit my corporate job. And up until that point, it had been about 2 to 3 years of dabbling in entrepreneurship, doing both simultaneously. So I was working my corporate job, but then I was mostly in network marketing at that point. I feel like as for many of us, is the gateway drug into entrepreneurship. So I was dabbling, I was doing all of that. But when I just decided I could not handle corporate life anymore, I was literally becoming unemployable. It was just sucking my life force energy. It was missing that soul piece that I stand for so deeply. And I just wanted more flexibility. I wanted to not feel capped in my income. I wanted to actually help people rather than fire them, which is a big part of what my job was before. So that was the first thing, quit the job. I was still in the city at that point, and I started personal training. I started doing Reiki sessions, spiritual life coaching. I started going beyond network marketing. Not that there's anything wrong with network marketing, but I started kind of building my own brand, my other skills. I started dabbling into other areas. And within about 8 to 10 months of quitting my job, doing all of that, it's the next thing hit. And it was wait, why am I still in the city? That was the next piece. So my husband and I packed up, sold everything at the time, and hit the road with no plan, which is actually funny because at the time of us recording this, I had Facebook memories pop up this week. And it was 7 years ago that we came to this exact area that I'm in now for the first time. And at that point, I didn't even like have a business. I thought I did, but I really didn't at the time. So it's kind of this like deja vu point in time to see just how much has changed in living this more nomadic lifestyle that I've been living over these last 7 years of entrepreneurship at the same time.
Yeah. And you said my favorite word, and I love the awareness that you had around dabbling. And I know we have a lot of professional entrepreneurs, but we also have a lot who listen to this podcast, but we also have a lot of newbie entrepreneurs, or people who are starting to call themselves entrepreneurs, but they're in what I would call that dabbling phase.
Yeah.
What were some of the signs compared to what you do now as the CEO of a seven-figure coaching company? Like, what were the signs of dabbling versus what you do now?
I would say signs of dabbling. I mean, for one, I think we all start in any area of building skills and expertise with a level of dabbling. So it had this curiosity energy. It also didn't really have a lot of sustainability yet. It didn't have predictability. It didn't have consistency because, well, I was dabbling. So I was like testing things out, trying this, trying that. So, initial dabbling, I think it took a lot of forms. There was the dabbling of what do I even want to be when I grow up kind of energy, where I'm checking out network marketing. I'm checking out personal training. I'm checking out coaching. I'm checking out all these different types of things that I could be doing. I was dabbling, throwing myself into courses, programs, certification. So there was like this learning component of the dabbling. And then on the business side, a lot of the dabbling was literally trying out all the different types of ways to put that into business. So it was like, oh, okay, I'll create a course. I will create a group program. I will take my first high ticket coaching client. I was just trying out a lot of different ways of packaging and putting things together and basically trying it out, seeing what fits, what resonated, what worked, what didn't work. And that was like a lot of my dabbling. I was dabbling in my marketing, hiring random agencies, running ads to God knows what. I remember I spent like 6 months of having my husband film me in all sorts of random settings, making these like 30-second inspirational clips, but I didn't really know what I was doing with those clips, but we're just filming all these clips. And I had this idea that people would sign up off a Facebook ad to chat with like a bot, and then the bot would drop them daily videos to their inbox, and then somehow I'd become a millionaire that summer. So that was like the energy to me of like the dabbling, just like trying a lot of things out, versus now, sometimes there's still dabbling, of like, oh, like, let me try this micro offer. Let me try this thing and see how it feels. But I would say as a whole, my business is a lot more clear. It's more defined. There's clarity around what are my offers, what's my business model, who are my ideal clients, what am I actually selling right now, which I will be honest, there's a lot of fluidity and flexibility in my business. I have a business model that to me is very simple and clear, where I have those core offers that are mostly open enrollment, evergreen type offers that are really scalable for me. But a lot of the actual day-to-day calls to action and promotion is really quite intuitive and flexible. Am I directly selling those things? Am I doing a micro offer? So it's like a new form of dabbling with a lot more of like a backbone, behind the scenes structure and vision that's happening. Because before, the vision was pretty undefined. It was more like what I knew I didn't want, which was like a corporate job, being broke. And I just wanted the opposite of that, versus now what I desire is a lot more defined.
The role of the visionary in business is typically where I see everyone who starts a business is where they aim to get to. I think a lot of traditional education beats that out of us as far as that intuitive role and how valuable that role actually is. Because we get stuck in the dabbling or just stuck in the doing of the business versus being in that truly visionary place that is the one that quantum leaps and 10x's. When did you notice the shift in your business to stepping into that visionary role? And what did you notice happened and changed in your business as a result of that?
Love this question. For me, I feel like the big defining kind of change for me was probably when I really burnt out. This was back in 2019. So I was a couple years into my business. I'd had my first 6 figures, but it was real messy. Like it really felt like it kind of happened by accident, and it was kind of just hodgepodge of things, like there was no real congruence or consistency. And I was exhausted, and I was I didn't know it at the time, but hiding a little bit under this identity that I think a lot of entrepreneurs get caught in of, oh, I'm multi-passionate, or even more so, I feel like in the spiritual space, oh, I'm multi-dimensional. So it's like, don't cage me, don't box me. I'm multi-dimensional, so I was doing all these things, but the reality was there wasn't that bigger vision. There wasn't really any kind of plan. And I was what I would call, and I hope I can say this on here, but a launch whore. I was just going from thing to thing to thing, like as if someone's going from man to man to man. Like I was never settling down at all, which was so dysregulating. And it was also just really hard to break into another level of income because I was spending so much time in that doing piece of like the marketing of it all, but also the now creating new modules and then delivering, and I'm someone who always really loves to over deliver for my people. So there was crazy amounts of calls. I also had very low boundaries and such at the time too. So it was like, hey, you want to book in with me at 3 a.m. on a Sunday? Sure. So I was literally quite tired, and it really wasn't sustainable. So I started to make some big changes at that point in terms of like simmering down the amount of launching that I was doing and starting to get more clear on my marketing, my messaging, my offers, all of those types of things, which wasn't like this was some overnight shift. Like I was actually still subtly a launch whore for probably 3 more years until I had a pretty big income dip in 2022, 2023. There was a couple dips, and I realized, oh, okay, I still haven't quite got this. I still have actually been launching more than I probably need to. And a big one for me was I was speaking to a lot of clients that I had essentially outgrown. So I was wondering why I had so many clients who weren't serious, who weren't committed, who weren't getting the results, even though a lot of clients at the same time were having great results. So there was this disconnect happening, and I started to basically realize I needed to refine. And when I started to refine, what did I want my core offers to be? Who am I really speaking to? And I stopped always just looking for the new shiny thing and actually refined things. I feel like my identity shift, but my income also shifted as well. My clientele really kind of cleaned itself up and shifted. And that really became a solid foundation for what I've grown in my business, at this current moment, I would say.
Were you in my coaching business in 2023? Because it's like exact mirror. And I think I saw that with a lot, because I'm a part of a great group for 6, 7, and 8-figure business owners, for businesswomen, called the Dames. And
cool.
After COVID, like pretty much everyone who's in the coaching space saw that dip. Because during COVID, there was like the huge surge of people, like they were just stuck at home. So they were signing up for things. They were learning. Like, people learned either personal development or like how to build a balloon wall. But then that 2023 sort of dip and pivot happened where like the world shifted, but it like shifted and it was off kilter and off balance, and no one knew what was kind of happening. And for me, for Crown Yourself in my coaching business, it did come back to that refining of like, what really do I love? Who do I love working with? And for me, I noticed that I had subscribed to a lot of the trendy coaching marketing tactics of the time of 2019, 2020, 2021. And I realized that the clients that I had been attracting from following those trends were not receiving the level of results that the clients for the ones that I coached that were at the multi-million dollar level, who were very established seasoned business owners. And I realized I prefer to coach, as some people would say, up versus the business coach who's like, I hit my first 10K month, so I'm going to teach you how to hit your first 10K month. And that sort of model of coaching where you can only coach from the place of where you've walked. And I'm like, well, Michael Jordan's coach, like you never see that in athletics. Like Michael Jordan's coach couldn't do what Michael Jordan does, but he could guide, facilitate, tweak, see the whole playing field, and improve the skill set of the main players. And I think that there has been a major shift in the industry of coaching for a next level style of coaching. What's the vibe that you've been feeling with it?
Yeah, I very much have been feeling, seeing, experiencing the same. And I really feel like buyer consciousness has shifted, and the consciousness of entrepreneurs in the industry has shifted as well. And, of course, there's exceptions and there's like the lag period and things that happen. But overall, I would say the consciousness has increased. So it's kind of called everybody forward, where I feel like investors, even people investing in themselves, they have more discernment and self-responsibility. I feel like that they're stepping into around their decisions and investments, because people are still buying as much, if not more than ever. It's just the way people are doing it, I feel, has really changed. And then on the business owner side of things, I think it's the same kind of energy where before people were just throwing things up, telling themselves they're an intuitive, which we're all intuitive, but they're just throwing things up intuitively with no real strategy, vision, plan behind it. And I feel like as business owners, a lot of us have realized, okay, maybe that's not the best strategy, the best approach to business. And it's called us all forward to really get clear. It's not even about niching down per se, but to really get clear on what do we stand for, what's actually our focus, what's our actual genius and expertise, and who do we actually want to work with? Because I think many people could probably relate to what I was like in earlier stages of my business, where I would literally work with anybody who would pay me. It didn't matter if they were ideal or not. It didn't matter if they were, and when I say ideal or not, it wasn't like out of integrity stuff per se, but more, it's like no one really wants to work with the people who aren't really ready to do the work, or they're not in that place. So I would, just take on anybody who was willing and said, even if their actions weren't matching their words, or if I was maybe wanting to work with a more elevated type of person, I would just kind of accept, anybody who wanted to come and work with me. So my own standards, I found, also increased. And I feel like a lot of business owners have probably been going through a similar type process where who we actually want to work with has become more refined as well. Like it's not just an offer or a message thing. It's actually how we want to work with people in our business, I feel like has changed. And also I think people are not trying to just have these kind of 5 options or whatever in the industry of how they run their business. So I'm noticing there's more creativity coming back. There's more diversification. And I feel like people are actually starting to think a little bit more like a business owner and a CEO, and not just this entrepreneur, buying into all the trendy energy in the online space. Like that's where I feel like the discernment has gotten a lot stronger on both sides of the picture, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And I've seen with the coaches that have stuck it out and have stayed in it, because a lot of people left the coaching industry.
So many. And I think we're going to see even more.
I completely agree, because it's building any business has some level of challenge to it.
Yeah,
and there's a personal growth and evolution that comes on it. And especially when you feel like it's your soul calling, but at the same time, there's a challenge. Sometimes that causes people to question their own calling versus like for me, I believe I've been an entrepreneur since I was 17 years old. So the entrepreneurship is a calling, and you have to be able to answer the call and also recognize the level of risk. Like I was on a phone call with a very big visionary CEO, huge, just amazing. And suddenly he shared with me that he was like, oh, I've invested like $1 million into building this product of my kids' inheritance. And I was like, oh, I don't feel so bad for investing 200,000.
Right.
Suddenly I don't, but there's that, the level at which you play it, there's a level of risk that's involved. So, and there's also the risk of like how you're perceived and the mask that we wear and the egoic risk. What were the biggest stripping away for you, the biggest perceived risk, either financially or identity wise, that you faced as you evolved and grew your business?
Yeah, because I really feel the identity piece is one of the biggest ones. And, many of us are black sheep in the family. I think a lot of us also have like the people pleasing mask as well that we've worn over the years. And I know for me personally, it's been so many death, rebirth kind of energies. It's actually really crazy when I think of the life I was living and who I was, when I really got into the coaching space, when, I was in another relationship that ended in a restraining order. I was working full-time in corporate. I was 70 pounds overweight. I was a total people pleaser. My friends called me Mother Jenna. I was taking care of my grandmother full-time, my ex, his son, my family. So it was just this completely different construct of a life into, the type of life that I live now. And when I think about the identity shifts that have had to happen, it's literally like all of these deaths and also so much acceptance, so much healing that has come through this process, and kind of coming to a place of I care, but I don't care, like what people think of me, where I think it's not true when people say they truly don't care, because we're all human. And, I've had people try to cancel me. I've had things happen and it sucks. Like nobody likes that. But I do feel like it's a muscle. We get stronger, we get more resilient, and ultimately who we're becoming needs to outweigh the attachment to who we once were. Because really from a consciousness perspective, it's like all identity work. Everybody keeps themselves trapped oftentimes in life because of these identity constructs that we've bought into, but that's what they are. They're identities, they're masks. They can be something we wear and we utilize, or they can be a trap to keep us in the same place, which, a lot of these, as I'm sure too, is like comes from trauma. So they're not necessarily who we truly are at our core. So that's really been my journey, I would say, through this whole process, is facing off with a lot of the discomfort of judgment. I still have family who have no idea who I am, what I do. I'll see them at a family function. They're like, so how's that little business? Like, are you going back to corporate anytime soon? Or, I've had families say, yeah, I'm really proud of them. I don't know how they make it work, but they've never asked us to borrow money. So they must be surviving, there's lots of projections. I've had, I have an entire half of my family who doesn't talk to me because they feel entitled that if I have success, I don't even know them that well, but like truly they feel and have told me I'm a terrible, selfish person, because if I am having success, then I should be sending them all money to provide for them. And so they don't talk to me. So there's been many things along the way, of being misunderstood, receiving projections, not to mention just in the online space with strangers in itself, but, specifically with people I like. I think of my wedding in 2019, and between entrepreneurship stuff and then the whole like COVID side of things stuff, I would say like 20% of the people who came to our wedding are even in my life anymore. And so it's not like I don't care and I'm just some harsh person, but I really have gotten a lot stronger where I can kind of, it's not compartmentalized as if I don't deal with it, but it's like a little bit of compartmentalized where my vision is so big and what I'm actually doing and who I'm here to be and embody matters to me so much more than this like matrix game of these other characters in my life, and it's kind of like that's quote or whatever where it talks about, sometimes friends are meant to be for a lifetime, other ones are meant to be for a season. And that's kind of how I just think about these people, these characters in our lives, where whether they're blood family or not, friends or not, stranger or not. Like, they're all just players on the playing board. I'm a player on the board too. Like, nobody's above or below, but no one has to be here, for the whole journey, in my experience or your experience or somebody else's experience. And so that's given me, I feel like, a lot of strength, to connect into the energy of sovereignty, of self-responsibility. And truly, it sounds kind of cliche, but like we create our own reality. So I've become kind of fierce at choosing what do I let into my energetic and literal space, and how much energy do I give other people, places, things. And the more I hold the vision, not the circumstance, of various things, the more I've also seen myself in a linear, tangible kind of way move more towards and create aspects of my vision as well.
I love what you said about your wedding, because I got married in 2014. And I turned to my husband on like the day after, because we had always said that when we have, because he was previously married and he was with his ex for like 13 years, and 13 is like a reoccurring number in him. So I said, on year 14, we're going to like come back together and, renew our vows and remarry, and our kids will be a part of it. And I've always had this vision. I'm so excited for it. It's going to be so fun. But I told him back in 2014, it was just this like intuitive download. I said, 80% of the people who are at our wedding are not going to be at our next one. And it has come true. Like almost like 80 to 90%. And it was just being able to have that recognition that, and it's just that sort of that intuitive knowing that it's okay for people to be in your life for a season and to be very valued for that season, and then to move on. And I think that as we are on this consciousness journey of evolution, of developing our own mission and our own soul, those who are not, or those who choose not to be, like, they're going to fall away from us. It's just how it is. And I think one of the scariest parts that I've had as an entrepreneur is because I didn't realize that back in like 2018, 2019. And I started to have friendships that were in the personal development world, that we were like masterminding together. And suddenly it was like, they weren't talking to me anymore. And like, granted, I was making more money than them. And suddenly I was like in a different space, in a different energy. And I was a mom. And it was like suddenly, and just allowing for that part of our brain that we're very familiar with, like fear, fight, flight, freeze, but there's also flock, and that like loneliness that can happen as an entrepreneur. Was that something that you ever noticed or struggled with along your journey as you were like getting canceled and family and like this? How did your circle re-evolve, or how did you consciously shift so that you were flocking to those groups faster, so that there was less of that lingering period, and almost like where our biological brains are like, holy fuck, we're out in the wilderness by ourselves, we're gonna die?
Yeah, I've had so many versions and layers of this. Like there's when I left my hometown to start traveling and, kind of really go in on my business, there was a version of that because I was kind of leaving behind everything and everyone I knew. And so many of those people are lovely. Many of them I stay in touch with, but also we're on like totally different timelines, like they're, got their like white picket fence in the city and their kind of corporate job. And, like they're living a different life. They don't get mine. And honestly, now I don't really get theirs because it's just totally different, and neither is right or wrong. But that also, felt very isolating. And I think another version or layer of this has been on my travels. For many of the earlier years, I feel like it was really isolating because I had this energy and this kind of mindset of like, well, we'll be moving on soon enough. So like, what's the point, of even really socializing? So it was quite isolating. I think it also contributed to burnout in my business because then I had no hobbies, I had no friends. So I would kind of just pour myself into the online space, which had its pros and cons, but that was quite isolating as well. And I mean, I did that. There was times I would stay in a place for 6 to 12 months and really still meet nobody, really, not with any depth. Like, sure, I like met people, but not really. And then I think another version of that too has been on the online space itself. There's many places that I have been plugged into, networks, spaces, masterminds, and the energy, maybe resonated at a time, but it shifted. And I mean, especially during, I would say like the COVID era, where like a lot of my, like online stuff, there was like lots of, things there, because especially during 2020, 2021, I had this like earth warrior, gotta wake everybody up kind of energy. So that was a lot to hold. It was a lot to embody, and there was lots of hate, lots of flack that kind of came from that, lots of people unfriending, lots of, there was lots of magic that came from it too, but there was also a lot of alienation. There was a lot of shifting and changing like who my circle was. Like I remember being in this big high ticket mastermind that I had paid in full, like $40K to be in, and it was very focused on hosting in-person events. And so I like learned some tangible things there, but then COVID was kicking off and everybody in there was planning their in-person conferences and stuff. And I was like, pivot, gotta stop, events will not be happening. And they're like, girl, you're crazy. And I'm like, no, like, look at this and look at that. And like, nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody was like seeing it. Everybody was so committed to this like really linear time and process. And so I, took a huge financial loss, but exited being in that because I'm like, well, there's not a congruence here, on consciousness, but also, how am I supposed to get support growing my business when to me, it was really clear and apparent in 2020, planning a bunch of in-person events needed to pivot. Because I had 2 events in Australia I was hosting and then a big conference in Canada. And I was like, no, I got to pivot. So there was like a lot of that kind of energy too, where I was exiting my mentorship spaces. I was exiting, that's where I had a lot of peers in terms of masterminds and like professional connections. But I felt like there was 2 really different timelines that was happening in the coaching world as well. So anyway, I guess my answer of how have I actually found more of my flock, I would say has been a combo of still speaking my truth intentionally and selectively. So people, like your vibe attracts your tribe, as cliche as that sounds. So when I've done that, I can't tell you the amount of both professional connections, friends, but also clients who have said, oh, well, we're really on the same page about X, Y, and Z. And then on top of that, they want to work with me because of my expertise, as well as just choosing to intentionally put myself in more aligned spaces like professional networking, masterminds, in-person events, etc., so that I can bring in more of the right people to my world who I really do want to be surrounded by.
It seems to me like you consciously just create that community. Like if it's not there, you focus on creating it rather than reactively waiting for it to like show up in your life, which is such a big difference between, a lot of people who will wait or okay, well, that one didn't work out. And then they have that grieving period and being able to then pivot and transition. How has grief played a role in your success?
That's a big one. For sure, because there's been so much, I would say, like death throughout the process. There's been a lot of grief as well, like, grieving who I thought I was, and a lot of my own identity stuff, in terms of like people pleasing and all of that kind of stuff. There's been grieving, letting go of lots of different clients and people in my world as well. There's been, grieving when I felt alone and isolated, whether physically in new places, but also online as well. And, I feel like what's really helped me the most has been to acknowledge the grief. Like, don't just push it down and try to replace it with more work, or stuff to do. Like, actually get into the body, feel and process the grief, like really be willing to dance with it, not wrong it either, and realize like there's always going to be grief, just the way there's always going to be joy. Like there's always going to be a range of emotions. And if there's not, something might be off. We might be disassociating. Like there might be something else going on there if there's never any grief ever. So I really learned, I feel like, to dance with the emotion of that and feel it. And also to be present to things like the joy, because for a long time, I would say I was pretty numbed out. Like I wasn't really feeling the grief but I wasn't really feeling the joy either. It was this kind of like head down, I'm building an empire, get shit done kind of mode. And that only works to a point. I feel like we can hustle, we can grind, we can disassociate, we can do those things for a while, but it doesn't have any kind of longevity behind it. And also, what's the point if we're numbed out and not feeling anything? So that's been a big part of my process and journey, where then I also feel like the grief doesn't last as long either. Like, I'm not scared of it, I'm not avoiding it, but also I can then move through it with more grace and ease and feel more joy, more bliss, more abundance, more creativity, I think, as a result of that as well.
Imagine getting a list of 20 podcasts every single week who are looking specifically for a guest like you. That is the beauty of podcastguest.com. In fact, podcastguest.com was exactly the platform that I used to get booked on the podcast that generated a $10,000 coaching client that kickstarted our entire agency model of how to profit from guest podcasting. By signing up for the podcastguest.com directory, you also get greater visibility for podcasters looking for guests just like you. Podcastguest.com allows you to get booked on podcasts to expand your reach and your audience. You can join the newsletter for free, featuring 20 podcasts every week, and join the paid expert directory so podcasters can find you. On a personal recommendation, I highly recommend joining the directory simply because it does give you greater visibility. And with the benefit of getting featured in the directory, you have a one-page media page that you can send any podcasters to show your bio, your speaking topics, your profile pics, your social media handles, and all the things I recommend you have on a media page. Podcastguest.com creates that for you when you join their directory and sign up for the newsletter. So click the link below to sign up for podcastguest.com.
What are the signs that you notice when your clients are out of alignment with their soul and are focused solely on strategy?
Lack of results. Like those women, and I can see it because I've been that woman, and maybe you have too, where we go through these phases. A common one is like, what do I just need to do to get my next client? Or what do I need to do to get to this income level? Like, what do I need to do? Which sometimes, yeah, there is that practical shit we need to do and we're not doing it, or we're not seeing it. But actually, I would say more often than not, it is the energetics. Like, it is the mindset, it is the emotions, it is the leadership. And we need to explore, our identity. We need to look at these things, because if we're just focused on strategy and things aren't working, to me, it's obvious it's not actually, like, throwing some more strategy on top of that and having a strategy sandwich is not going to fix the bigger picture, of what is a gap for somebody. Like, let's take, as an example, relationships. I think when things are good at home, things are better in business. And there's women out there who are really, really struggling in their relationships. And, it doesn't matter sometimes if they have the best strategy. Like, yeah, we can grind through it to a point, but at some point, if we're feeling really unhappy or unsafe at home, it usually catches up with us. And I've had a lot of women come to me where they've had high levels of success, then they've crashed and burned, and they had to clean up the energy and deal with the things that they were trying to override by pouring into their business with all their strategy and their masculine and their thoughts and all the things they're basically trying to control. And then at some point they have to come back to themselves, to their intuition, to the energetic side of things, and realize, like, we're in a relationship with our business just like we are with, like, partners. And if we don't actually work on that relationship, it doesn't matter how much planning we have, or structure we have, strategy we have. Like, we still have to actually be in harmony in the relationship dynamic itself.
I love that you said the business relationship. That's what my Forbes article was on. It was titled, "Are you in an It's Complicated Relationship with Your Business?" Most people are. Yep. Most people are. But the relationship, and I would love to explore, like, what have you noticed, especially for women? Do you find that business and or money is more of a masculine relationship, and the woman, when she's in a space, she adopts those masculine principles, and thus it doesn't have that polarity. What have you seen with between the feminine and masculine energetics that play themselves out in the relationship with both business and money?
The biggest thing I can say is our business, like a lot of the time, we're either trying to mother our business, like we're trying to micromanage it. And don't get me wrong, like when we create a new business, like when we're in that kind of dabbling phase, our business does require a lot of support and kind of mothering to an extent. You know, it's kind of coming through its own birth portal. And that's amazing. That's a part of the process. And it still happens within our business on a regular basis. Like, say, if we have a new offer coming through, there's like that conception, there's that birth into the world, you know, then it also usually requires like a lot of time, love, energy to like get something up and running. You know, like I feel like you've probably been going through this right now with, say, like your book. And so there's a lot that goes into that. But then I feel a lot of us don't actually let it like expand from adolescence into adulthood in our business. So like, let's say if somebody's running a mastermind or a membership or something, like a lot of us are hyper micromanaging all the little things. They're not bringing in the team that they need. They're not trusting their clients to actually like do the work to build community amongst each other. Of course, yes, we need to lead and create the structure, but a lot of us aren't really trusting the next stage of the process. And so we're trying to like hold control of all of the things. And that can really stifle our growth. You know, it means that at that point, we don't actually have a scalable business, whether it's energetically or sometimes there's more of a practical strategy piece where maybe our program, let's say, doesn't have the capacity to take more people. But there's that feminine, masculine dance that I feel like happens in order for us to make more money. And sometimes it's the letting go of control. It's moving out of kind of the mother archetype into more of like a crone archetype in our business. Sometimes it's the maiden energy of, you know, like bringing in new fresh energy and ideas and things. Like we get to wear these different hats, these different archetypes, these different masks in that kind of energetic sense as well. And I feel like part of being a woman with a business and having that CEO energy is knowing and using our intuition of like, when do we need to get into the visioning and the emotions, the energy behind things? And when do we actually still need to get into like get shit done mode? Because there's still like a practical, tangible level of things that need to be done. And this is where I feel like people create a lot of their gaps in their business, because usually we resist one and put a lot of time and energy into the other. And at that point, like then we can only financially grow to a point, because, you know, we really need both in order to thrive. And it's not always equal. And I think that's the big thing is in business and just as people in general, most of us do have like a dominant core essence when we think of feminine, masculine energy. And for a lot of us, it's actually quite close. You know, like for me, I would say it's like maybe 55 masculine, 45 feminine. And sometimes that changes throughout like the seasons in my business, but knowing that, and, you know, sometimes I'll meet people where it's like they're at an 80% feminine free flow with 20% masculine energy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's their ideal or optimal state of energy. And so maybe that person, everything would change if they were like 60-40 or even 70-30, where they just bring that in. And sometimes bringing that in can look different for so many people. If somebody's really lacking the masculine strategy, it might be them, let's say, hiring a business coach to help them and getting a team member or two to help execute and do the things. If somebody is doing all those things, but they're not being creative, actually a lot of the time the team piece will help too, because they can free themselves up to be more in the creative energy. So either way, you know, it can really make a big difference for people. But I think it comes down to self-awareness of, hey, what's my optimal here? And like, am I in the optimal, or am I actually in kind of a messed up or misaligned energetic here of how I'm in my relationship and dynamic to my business?
Yeah, I think of it like, I love that you said the birth process, because the work happens in the contraction. But
Yeah.
then just like with birth, like the contraction lasts for like 90 seconds compared to there's 7 minutes of like expansion of the body, like receiving that expansion that came from that last contraction. And I think of that in terms of like the doing the work phase for those who sometimes get too in their feminine and then neglect the masculine, and of the doing of the management or self-leadership, or, there's some things that they need to respond to and heightening their responsibility. That masculine contraction is required in that space to penetrate, so that then you can open up and receive and then have that expansiveness. And flip the script on the other side. Like, I remember when I was giving birth to my first son, and like it took 24 hours because I wasn't allowing my body to relax in between contractions because I was so scared of the next contraction.
Mm-hmm.
And that has happened on a business sense so many times. And I see it happen with my clients, where suddenly like they get into that hyper control, hyper just micromanagement. Suddenly they have to have their hands on everything. And thus they don't allow themselves to have that full relaxation and that full expansion that can come post contraction, so that you're actually more prepared for the next one.
Yes.
So there's a
100%.
beautiful dance and dichotomy of the energetics of business. And when you look at that from a soul perspective, where do you see specifically, because our audience is 80% women, like where do you see that women get stuck? Is it because they've swung the pendulum so much into the masculine, to like the hyper vigilant mothering the baby of their business, versus, swing the pendulum the other way?
I honestly would say it's pretty equal, and I think that the commonality here is the extremes. So let's say, I'm just generalizing here, but let's say about anybody who's not in balance and harmony within reason, because lots of us aren't, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And I totally have moments where I'm not, right? And so like sometimes we switch the pendulum and we get kind of out of alignment, and it's just for a day or a moment. Sometimes we go through this for a season, and what I find happens with women, whether they're on one side or the other, we wrong ourselves for it, and then we start to spiral. And I always say, when we hit resistance, we do more of what we know. So for some of us, that's like a freeze kind of thing. Some of us, that's like throw ourselves more into work and distraction. Some people procrastinate. A lot of people then just jump from thing to thing to thing, and it can vary. But I find when we have those contraction moments, a lot of us make it mean something different or something more than it needs to, and then it causes that like spiral effect where now we're thinking we totally suck, everything sucks, nothing's ever gonna, and it just like starts to spiral. And so somebody who's really in their feminine, I would find, most likely they usually don't have a lot of strategy, structure, support going on, and they're just totally just free flowing a lot of the time. And so their version of that is usually saying, oh, I'm just gonna like go over here and I'm creatively doing this, and they're just really avoiding getting the support and structure, which can lead to a lot of alienation, within themselves, feeling separate, feeling alone, and oftentimes feeling like they're in this just creative state, but they're not actually having the results that they desire. So they feel really bad about themselves. And then they start to link this displeasure with things like creativity. And so it just creates this mind fuck for a lot of women that makes them feel like they're bad entrepreneurs, they're bad CEOs, they're bad business owners. So they start to second guess themselves. And then on the flip side, I feel like those of us who get more into the masculine tendencies, we throw ourselves more into the work. We get even more disconnected to our emotions. We can feel really alienated on this side too, really like on our own, really unsupported, and oftentimes really burdened, like overburdened, starting to resent clients, starting to resent our business, starting to, get really stressed about money, even if money is coming in. And both sides, both situations usually create a bit of a financial cap because we're not in our alignment. We can't really see a sustainable path forward. And that's where I feel like a lot of women keep themselves limited. And so it's not usually more strategy on either side. It's usually more about getting curious on our own identity. Like, what do I need to feel supported? What would my highest self do in this situation? And even when we think, okay, well, more strategy, like, what does that really mean? It really, to me, just means more structure, more intentionality, more support. And on the other side, it's usually more creativity, more actually being in tune with our body, our sensations, how we're really feeling. And when we can actually look at those things and we don't just label it, strategy, or like feminine, and we go deeper into like, well, what is that actually? We can usually make those tweaks and changes, which isn't always comfortable. So I know most of us get into our flow and then we don't know what we don't know. But it's those subtleties of, oh, okay, so what I really want here is more support, or, oh, I'm not really feeling creative in my business anymore. And if I'm not feeling creative and I'm not having fun, what's the point? I should go get a job.
I love what you said about the support. And I think that one of the things that I've seen that some women struggle with is receiving support from money, of being able to, that's a part of the support. It's not just go off and create a whole bunch of things. It's also that being able to allow yourself to receive the support of money flowing into your business and to fuel you and to, provide for you and to support you. And I think there's so many pieces of healing that come when we look at these energetic aspects of our business beyond the scope of strategy, and then applying, whatever strategy it is that we need to apply based on where we're at. And I love that you said strategy is not just strategy, it's also like structure. And having that masculine structure in the business and things like rhythm and routine that create predictability, that creates scalability. And if you think about the masculine energy anyways, like that's the predictable, like the healed masculine is predictable, it's stable, you trust it. You trust that it's going to provide for you. So
absolutely.
I know that for me, what you said about resistance was brilliant, that we default. we do. And I'm like, yeah, because when I hit resistance, I default into like do mode versus every time when I've hit resistance recently, my big pivot has been in, okay, here's resistance. I'm going to sit and I'm going to be with the resistance. And instead of just doing, I'm going to be in the space of receiving the plan. So then I do strategically and intentionally, not just doing whatever I can to like try to like in that urgency, scarcity, survival energy, because that just sucks and is repulsive.
That's the thing, and I think a lot of us lie to ourselves too, and we'll be like in doing mode and telling ourselves, well, I'm doing all the things, so it should be working. But the reality is it's like that refinement and intentionality piece that means everything. This is where I see lots of women and they're like, well, I'm doing so much. And they're like starting to resent their business. They're like, I'm posting all the time and I'm watching all the master classes and I've tried this strategy and I've tried that strategy. But a lot of the time when I ask, I'm like, well, how long have you tried that thing? Oftentimes it's not very long. Or when they're posting a lot, I'm like, okay, well, what's like the strategy behind it? And, to me, saying you're posting daily and you've got calls to action on most things, like that's not a strategy. That's just posting with a little bit of intentionality. Strategy to me is like where we're actually thinking about touch points and how are we actually connecting deeper with our people, and how does one thing we invite them into potentially lead to another thing, and all of these like subtleties, but actually things that make up the strategy. And so a lot of us have this idea of, oh, my strategy's not working, but it's actually not a strategy. It's literally still just a nothing burger, of just stuff, where we can feel like, oh, we look at it and it like looks like there's a lot of beef in that, but there's not. So if someone's feeling resentful to their business and they're listening to this because they feel like they've been doing so much, it's probably not more doing that's going to fix it. It's more about how you're approaching what you're doing. And oftentimes it's cutting out some of the things you're doing. Like, do you need to have 27 lead magnets and projects and things on the go, offers on the go? Is that causing you to do a lot of things, but maybe none of them that effectively? And I think this is where that multi-passionate thing kind of intersects, because I say this to myself, I say it to my clients, it doesn't mean you're just like not going to do the other things. It just means we actually want to do things well. So sometimes things need to go a little further down the timeline, or they need to sit on the shelf for a little bit longer so we can do things really well and feel really good about them. And I think sometimes it's almost this sneaky little self-sabotage thing that we do where we're doing so much, which makes us kind of feel good on the surface. But the reality is none of it's that great. It's not like our excellence, that we can bring to these things, and the refinement that can lead to things working so well in our business. But just like, doing a webinar for the first time ever, it's like, okay, well, maybe nobody bought, doesn't mean webinars won't work for you. Or, if you are posting content and putting calls to action, it doesn't mean that couldn't work for you. But you actually have to look at like, well, what worked, what didn't work. And it's that refinement piece that I think is the ultimate strategy, or like strategic thinking approach, that really can change the whole game, that a lot of us aren't doing. And maybe we don't think we're worth it, or maybe we don't think it could be that easy, that if we just make tweaks, it'll work. So that I think is like a huge, game changer for so many women.
Amen. I literally wrote about this in my book last week. And I was in my little writer's retreat because we had such a big breakthrough. I was writing the chapter on the 10 pitch commandments for a podcast. And I was like, yes, this seems like a lot to be doing. However, we used to have a cold pitch strategy. We still leverage the cold pitch strategy for businesses that have a lower amount of visibility than some of our current clients who have $100 million companies, who have a lot of visibility on Instagram or top 100 podcasts. And so when I looked at the strategy of you can't apply that same strategy to those other clients. And so when I was breaking down this pitch strategy, I was thinking, oh my gosh, there will be people who would be like, this is a lot. This is a lot to put into one email. And I'm like, yes. Well, you can go on Facebook into all the free groups for 30 minutes and post and, say, here's me. And you might get 5 people who even comment or like your post. Or you can go into the threads that have 181 people who've already responded as a coach to come onto that podcast that isn't even ranked. Or you can send this email, targeted strategic. This is the exact email. I took 30 minutes, sent it to 2 podcasters. One was the top entrepreneur podcast, got 2 responses back and 2 bookings for audiences with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of downloads. So I think, it's the difference between the level of intentionality of strategy and the scattered, but I feel like I'm doing a lot more here, but it's lacking the depth. And I think it's back to what we started out with, just, the difference in the coaching industry as a whole. People are starving for that depth now, and that level of connection and personal connection. So I'm excited for what you're bringing to this world, Jenna, because you bring such depth, such heart, such intentionality to every interaction. And I see it and I notice it. I see it in your posts. And I see it in how you handle the hate that comes on your posts sometimes. And you really approach it gracefully and with such heart. And I just want to honor that in you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. That means the world. And I see that in you as well. And I really think you hit the nail on the head. The depth piece is huge. And it's something I feel like everyone should just notice and check within themselves of how are they bringing that into their business. There's a lot of people who are creating accidental, they don't realize they're doing it, but window shopper experiences for their people. So it's lacking that depth, it's lacking that context that people crave. And there's lots of shiny things that get pumped in the industry. I still see a lot of people talking about selling in the DMs. I rarely do sales calls anymore. And I don't believe that they're bad. You know, it's one approach. Like, people can choose what they do or don't want to do. And like, that's totally okay.
100%. And it all comes down to that beautiful thing, our power of choice. And that's really where our sovereignty lies.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, are you bringing depth? Because yeah, it can work great to sell in the DMs and not do sales calls. It's fine. But also, if your content also lacks depth and all of your other processes lack depth, it won't really work. But if somebody is really nailing that in their content, their free stuff, all of, other things, totally, you can have a successful business without sales calls. And I think that's where people are like missing the mark a little bit. And so they're just doing a lot of different things that don't have the depth piece. But if they bring the depth in with intention into the things that they choose to double down on, then a lot of more magic happens in our business. Because like you said, that's really what people want. That's what they respond to at this point in the industry, is the depth piece.
Mm-hmm. Jenna, I would love to pivot into a little bit of rapid fire to wrap this up.
Yeah,
Ready?
do it. Let's do it.
Who is your favorite female character in a book or a movie, and why?
Okay. The first one that comes up, and this is kind of random, but I'm totally obsessed with the book and show, more so the show, but Daisy Jones and the Six. If you are listening to this and you haven't watched that on Amazon Prime, you're missing out. You got to watch it. It's a 10-part miniseries, and I watched it last year, and I never rewatch things. And I will admit, in the last 12 months, I've watched it. And
you watched it how many times?
I think 6.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and I don't even really know. I just can't tell you enough about how good it is and how much I love it. It's just really good. It's based on a book, and the main character, Daisy Jones, she's loosely based off of Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac. It's like inspired by. It's not like a biography or anything. It's its own story, but it's kind of inspired by. And so I really love the story. Find a good book. It's hard to find a good show that's actually just really good. 10 out of 10, in terms of acting, casting, story. And she's just a really great character, like in like the feminine kind of entrepreneurial space, when you actually listen to the journey and story. And as I say it, I'll honestly probably rewatch this
series again. Amazing. Yeah. What person, alive and in their time, would you want to trade places with just for a day to like be in their body, be in their mind, see how they thought, experience the world through their eyes?
Oh, this is a really good one. Is it terrible if I say Daisy Jones from the show?
No.
I feel like I don't want to be a movie star or famous singer, but I think it would just be really cool to experience that for a day. Like, I'm somebody who I feel like in my entrepreneurial journey and path, like, isn't really trying to become famous, like I feel like somebody can have a lot of success and brand recognition, but I'm not trying to be like a 9-figure gazillionaire all over the world at that level. Like, that actually sounds daunting to me when I want to spend lots of time offline, homesteading, farming in nature. And I'm not saying it has to be an either or, but it's like I feel like that's not my path, of like what excites me. And that's where I think it could be just really fun to kind of get into the glam of the Hollywood life and that level of fame for like a day.
Love it. What is your money routine as a business owner?
Oh, I love this. I would say for me, the big things, because I love to teach about this, but the Cliff Notes version is, I call them rituals, and I do Money Mondays, Financial Fridays. So every week, non-negotiable, usually it's like 30 minutes. This isn't super time intensive. And I feel like anybody who wants to grow their business should have an hour a week or so to actually work on the energetics and the like logistical stuff of money in their business. So for me, Money Mondays is more about visioning, it's more about planning, projecting, and Financial Fridays is more about like spreadsheets, like looking at the numbers, making sure I feel like energetically clean and complete and clear on things. So then when I get back into my next Monday flow, whether I'm looking at my month, my week, my year, I can feel really good and clear on things. And so sometimes that also brings in like dance parties or embodiment practices, sitting down with the accountant, whatever. But at a high level, it's Money Monday, Financial Friday are my two big money practices within my business.
What is your morning and evening routine to set you up for success?
I keep a very fluid routine. To me, it's more about having, a morning, evening slot, like space to do these things than it is about the actual what I do during those times. So for me in the mornings, it's a non-negotiable, like no phone, electronic kind of stuff for the first hour of my day. I like pretty slow mornings, so sometimes this extends out for like 3+ hours, but I get out, I make sure I get my feet on the ground. I like to read a bit of a book. I usually go through my vision, my day, my plans, both the energetics and like the practical things that I'm going to be doing and focusing on and calling in that day, usually with some coffee and oftentimes a workout. And in my evenings, similar kind of thing. It's like the last 1 to 2 hours of my day is like no electronics. We try to take the lights off and do more like red light, salt lamp kind of vibes and keep it as dark and chill as possible and really just relaxing in those final hours of the day. So oftentimes I do stretching. I do what's called yoga blocking. It's like a certain type of fascia kind of relief. So a lot of stretching, lymphatic drainage kind of stuff, and reading is the big one. Lots of reading and just snuggling my puppy, hanging out.
Love it. What do you define to be your queendom?
Ooh, I would say because my life is fluid right now, I would say my queendom is really within me, in my energy. And I would say by extension, nature, like the forest, just me getting outside really helps me connect in with that part of myself more than anything else.
And lastly, how do you crown yourself, Jenna?
Perfect final question for this topic on your amazing podcast. I think it's about choosing myself. Every day is crowning myself, because it's really easy to put the crown on other people, to give our power away or even just our priorities away. But it sounds so cliche, but when we fill up our cup first and foremost, we're a lot more effective at helping and supporting and contributing to others. And so it's like the little nuances in the day. Like for me as an entrepreneur, it's like having the morning, evening routines. It's actually making sure to take a pee break and honor my body, have a lunch. These things that actually contribute to us feeling really good throughout our day and not overextending or pushing ourselves, and basically saying energetically that we matter less than our business, because that just creates resentment in the business and definitely does not have us feeling like a queen or a boss.
Makes us feel like a slave to our businesses. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jenna, this has been amazing. I have loved getting to know you online, getting to know you more on this podcast. How can we find you? How can we work with you? Plug yourself, queen.
Thank you so much for asking. Yeah, I hang out the most online, I would say, on Instagram and Facebook. So my Instagram is my brand name, which is also my website, which is Soul Meets Strategy. And on Facebook, it's my name. So Jenna Faye Madden. And I genuinely love making new connections, personally, professionally. I feel like those are one in the same in the coaching space. And it's all about helping each other rise up. So if you're a woman listening to this and you vibed, don't only give me a follow, which I do love, or a friend request, but also send me a message and let me know how you found me, because I would love to connect with you. I'd love to hear from you and learn more about you. And if you want to learn more about how you can work with me, if you want to learn more about all my amazing free resources and all that kind of good stuff, you can go to my Instagram bio, or you can go to my website where you can find all the things.
And all of those links will be in the description. So if you want to connect with Jenna, which I highly recommend you do, follow her content, connect with her. She is a real human. She's really amazing and she's super cool. Have her in your world because, as you know, you are most like the 5 people you surround yourself with. So always keep looking to up-level your circle with who you are so that those flock periods in your business don't feel so wonky as you're up leveling and quickly quantum leaping to your next level. As always, my fellow sovereigns, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If what you heard resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and start creating a bigger impact now by sharing this with a friend. Just by doing that one simple act of kindness, you are creating a royal ripple to support more people in their sovereignty. And if you're not already following on social media, connect with me everywhere at crownyourself.now for more inspiration. I am so excited to connect with you in the next episode. And in the meantime, go out there and create a body, business, and life that rules. Because today, you crown yourself.